Hi friends, Tracy here from the Sewing Channel. Oh yeah, I have a treat for you today. I found the Holy Grail for free motion quilting feathers. And since I'm in a giving spirit, stay till the end where I am going to give you my best tips and troubleshooting for this exact feather. You don't want to miss it. I have 2 blocks today to share with you on our free motion quilt along. I have always wanted to make this feather. This is the whole reason why I even wanted to free motion quilt. This feather right here. Now the trick I'm going to show you, the Holy Grail secret for feathers that are on the move or look like they're moving, I first learned about it on Bold Notion Quilting, and I need to give them full credit. I have watched hundreds of free motion quilting videos, and this is the first time I've ever seen this trick. With a marking pen that erases with water, I am just drawing an S shape right from the corner of my block. See here where it curves like a bowl shape? Find the center and then just draw a line straight out. And then you're going to find that same curve at the bottom of that S shape and make your line coming right out of that curve. I know it probably doesn't make sense now, but at the end of this video, I do go into in-depth detail on how to do this feather. I troubleshoot the whole thing for you. To make sure I started off right, I went ahead and just drew a petal or feather on there to start with, just to guide me. And you see here, I'm just going up and around, making that teardrop shape off of the vein of that feather. I really took my time on this moving feather because this was the first time that I had ever free motion quilted a moving feather. Now I've done regular feathers and practiced free motion quilting on those, but never one that moved. So I was really taking my time, and there's a few mess ups, but you know, it is what it is. They call these bump back feathers, and that's because you hit the one below it and then bounce back up and down into the vein again, and then you come back around again and you're going to hit that other feather on the top, come back up a little bit, and then bounce around, and they call it a bump back feather. So I didn't make up the name of it, but that's just what it is, I guess. I love what the girl said on Bold Notion Quilting. She said to respect the line always. So that initial line that we made, we're creeping up to it ever so slowly, but we're getting there. And we have to be mindful of it. We do not want to cross over with our stitching on that line. So you see what I did there? I bounced back up, and I'm taking note of that line, and then I'm just coming back down into the vein. But watch, when I come back up out of the vein, I need to make another feather, but it needs to be below that line, and you'll see right here. And then I come right into that other feather. Wherever it hits, that's where I go. And when I bump back off of this one, it's really low and it's below the line. This is very important to get that illusion of that wavy or feather in the wind. So I'm continuing on with my next feather, and it's a small one, you'll notice, because that's where I bump back off of that little one that was below it. Now there are some secrets to get these ones just perfect, and I go into more detail at the end of this video, so you'll want to be sure to stay till the end. But the main thing is you want to stay above the line now, but you want to come close with the first few feathers that you do. So you see here, I'm just continuing on, and I'm bouncing off just like before of the one below it. When I get to the top of my quilt block here, I'm going to just follow that blue vein that I made initially, and I'm just going to go down to the bottom, and I'm going to start on the next side. Now this feather on this side has to be larger at the bottom, and again, more detail at the end. Now in this free motion quilt along, we have separate blocks that we do. They're all separate because it's a quilt as you go quilt along. So it's a little bit harder for me to gauge which way I want to look at this feather the way I'm doing it, because I can turn it any which way. So I did have a little trouble with that, but otherwise it was pretty easy to maneuver around. Now you can see here we're coming up on that next line. So remember, we need to respect that line fully. So I'm going to come up out of the vein, go around, and you'll see here I'm going to bump back until I can make another bump freely. So I'm going to come back down a little bit. You see me do there. And then I'm going to come up and around in a second. There I go. And go back into the vein area. Now we're going to do all the feathers above that line. Now remember that very first feather is only as big as the one that's underneath it in width, so to speak. And then you want to get those feathers to sort of hit toward the line a little bit. I'm not even sure which block this is in the quilt along. I want to say it's like number 16 or 17 or 18 maybe. I don't know. So anyways, I'm headed toward the top here, as you can see. Now there is a trick coming up to the top when it's flowing to the right there, and I go into more detail at the end. Sorry. But you can tell that as I get closer to the top, my feathers are starting to come in more. They're not as wide out to the left. They're coming in more, because if not, you're going to have an odd, unbalanced feather. So, hope that makes sense. For the most part, I shared with you this particular feather all in real time. I did not speed up any of the video. It was all exactly how I free motion quilted it. And like I said, I did really take my time. But on this next feather block that we're going to do, I did speed up some of it just for boredom's sake. I don't want you guys to get too bored. Check out this feather. Oh my word, it makes making feathers that have movement so easy, this trick. Oh my word. So here what I did was just add some echoing onto the quilt block. And so all you're going to do is just, echo around it. However shape yours ends up being, just echo until it's all echoed. This block was truly a lot of fun, and I will be doing feathers a lot. So here I'm just spritzing it and getting rid of the blue, and oh my word, it just turned out great. Even with all of my imperfections too, and there are many in there, but it doesn't matter because it just all blends. Up next in our quilt along is twin feathers that are on the move or in the wind. Oh yeah, I had to do another feather. With the twin feathers, you're going to just make the S shape on the one side coming out of the bottom, and you're going to add your marks, your lines within those curves. And then you're going to flip your quilt block around and do your S shape coming out of the bottom of this side. And then you're going to add your lines within those curved areas on this one. I also mark again that very first feather at the bottom of each of my S shapes. And here I'm just putting like a dotted line down the center between them. And that just gives me a guide so I know not to go beyond that. And then I also do that along the edges too, just to make sure that I just don't go over my boundaries. You're going to free motion quilt this feather just like we did previously on the larger feather. You're just going to start off with that first feather at the bottom and then bump back off of it, off of the bottom one underneath it. One of the main things that you have to be careful when having two feathers close to each other is the boundaries, the edge of the quilt block. You don't want to go over that. So you need to be mindful of that. If not, you are going to end up with a very unbalanced feather. So you just want to be sure to follow those boundaries. And you can see here we are respecting the line definitely. And that is the most important thing in this particular feather, to get it to have all that movement. And you can see there that I made that first small one. It was just about as wide or big as the one below it. And then you notice as soon as it got bigger in feathers, it started to get smaller. And now I'm going to go down that vein in the center and follow it all the way to the bottom and start with my feathers on the left-hand side. Now the left-hand side, that very first feather has to be bigger, wider, so to speak, than the other side. That's going to give it much balance. Now you can see I'm above the line and I made those first few feathers a little bit larger toward the line, and now I'm going to get a little bit tighter and smaller, and I'm going to follow that right hand flow of the feather going all the way up to the tip. I'm going to keep following along the vein of this feather, and then when I get to the very tip, when I see that I have enough room, I'm going to make one teardrop on the end, making it the top of the feather right there. Oh my word, so cute. For the next feather, I'm going to put it on fast forward and play a little music until this feather is done, and then I'll meet you back here. Look how cute these twin feathers turned out. And the next thing I did was just add a bunch of pebbles everywhere and in between the feathers and all along the sides, just to give it a great filler. I didn't do anything to the feathers particularly, just all around it. And for boredom's sake, I'm not going to quilt all these pebbles on video. I know it gets pretty boring after a while. But here I'm just spritzing off all of the blue line, exposing all of that beautiful white free motion quilt stitching. Look at how darling. I am really pleased with the way that these turned out. Have you known about this trick on how to do the feathers? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. But I'm going to give you all of the ins and outs and all the troubleshooting for a moving feather right now. The very first tip I would like to give you is on how to make that S shape. At the very bottom, you can see here, I started with a curve. You do not want to do that. You want the very bottom of this S to have somewhat of a straighter resemblance instead of that curve right out of the gate. The next thing, of course, is to make those lines coming right out of the center of those curved areas. Now, everyone needs boundaries, and our feather does too. So let's make a resemblance of some sashing, so to speak, or the edge of our quilt block on the sides, and that's what those lines are. The next major tip I want to share with you is when you make that very first feather on that bottom right hand side, you need to indent it. You don't want to make it really big to begin with. And that was a mistake I was making a lot, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And all that time, it was because I didn't make that right-hand side indented. I kept thinking that it had to be really long and really big to start with so that all the rest of them looked right. But that's not the case. So wherever your boundary is, make sure it comes inward. I want you to notice that right here we are getting close to that boundary, that edge right there, say if it's sashing, so to speak. And that's okay. You see that hump on the other side is pushing us out toward that. So we don't want to go beyond that. We want to stay within the boundary. And that's where that boundary comes in really handy. Now you see here, I'm coming close to the line, and you probably remember from earlier in the video, we must always respect that line. Give it much respect. You stay on the other side of that line, always. So you can see here, I'm approaching that line and I'm not going beyond it, and I'm going to bump back off there, and when I get to enough space right there, I'm going to make that tiny one. Someone was at my door and I forgot where I was at, so that's why I retraced that small one and I bumped back off of it. Now when you bump back off of that tiny one that's underneath the line, you want to make it just as wide as the one below it. Now those next two that I made sure that they came close to the line without going over it toward the bottom. Now my next ones though are not going to be that big, because now we need to get smaller, tapering those in to give it the right illusion. And once I get to the top, I'm going to trace down that vein all the way till I get to the bottom. Now remember when we indented that right feather to begin with? On this left side, we need to make it all the way to the boundary, to the sashing side. And that's going to give us a really balanced feather. Now that was some of the stuff that I had to learn on my own, because I just couldn't figure out why mine was looking all crazy. Again, you're going to respect that line. And here I didn't make a tiny little feather on the inside. I just went ahead and went up that vein and made a larger feather and wrapped it around, and it's only as wide as that one that's just underneath it. And then I'm going to try to get that toward the line there. But since it's going up the opposite way here in a second, that's okay if that third one up from the line does not hit all the way to the line. Now you see here the other side of that feather is pushing us toward our boundary right there, and that's okay. That's exactly what we want. I have been studying this feather for so long on how to do it that it took me so long on how to figure out the proportions, because the way I was learning on all the video tutorials that I was watching, my proportions were way off and I couldn't figure out why. And this is why right here. You have certain times that you need to hit those certain boundaries and whatnot. Like right here, for instance, you don't want to hit your boundary sashing because your feather is going off to the right. It's curving to the right. So you want to start tightening up those areas. So hopefully you can start to take advantage of all the little tips and tricks that I've learned so far after studying this beautiful feather. Do you think that this is the Holy Grail for a feather that has movement? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. And if you found any value in my video today whatsoever, please help me out and subscribe to my channel. Until next time on the Sewing Channel, take care.